Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 368 How Disobedience Plagues the Mind, Part 5 The Impact of Complacency. The podcast objectives are reveal how complacency is always the worst possible outcome, reveal why there is no room for complacency in your quest, analyze how many have come to lose their spiritual senses, and analyze the fate of your conscience when you are complacent. This lesson contains timelines and other visuals. Therefore, if you are listening to the podcast, I advise you to watch the video version on our website or YouTube, or request a PDF of the lesson so you can add the visual effect. The worst possible outcome. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 131 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we analyzed the impact of nonconformance and how this spiritual virus progresses the work of distrust by compromising our execution zone. As you have learned, nonconformance leads to complacency, i.e., the critical degree of disobedience. To our good fortune, the word of truth provides a perfect example of this uniquely subtle yet damaging degree of lawlessness. From now, I would ask that you take a few minutes to review the parable of the talents found in Matthew 25:14 through 30. We will use this story in conjunction with the story of King Saul found in 1 Samuel 15 to ascertain the grave impact of complacency. Now, there are many takeaways from this familiar parable, and many of these have to do with the danger of complacency. Vis-a-vis, the man who received 1 talent did nothing with his talent while he had the chance. And perhaps the worst thing about it is he knew his master was expecting an increase. He testified to it, saying, "Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed." The question then is, why didn't he invest his talent like his fellow servants? He understood his master would be very displeased if he did not yield some return on his investment. Knowing this, why didn't he do more with the 1 talent he was given? The answer is sure. It is because he, like King Saul, was being plagued by despair. We know this because he who received 1 talent confesses to his master, saying, "And being afraid, I went and hid your talent in the ground." Alas, we find another man in Scripture destroyed by fear. We can confirm this matter because the actions he took were irrational. And this is one of the primary telltale signs that someone is being plagued by fear and despair. Their actions are quite insane. For example, a servant taking actions that will clearly and very much upset his master, who has the power to cast him into outer darkness, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. Not only were his actions irrational, but so was his response to his master. It was really quite insane. And if you would allow me to paraphrase, here is the excuse this man gave his master for not growing his talent. Master, you gave me a talent, and I knew you wanted me to grow it so that I could give you the increase at the appointed time. But I was afraid because you are a rough man, and I am very sure you would have been very upset with me if I failed to increase the talent. And so I didn't do anything with it. I figured it was better to give your talent back to you than to lose it. So here you go. I'm giving you your talent back. You can keep it. Now, when we put it like that, which I submit is fairly accurate, you can see why his master was so upset. You can also see why the complacent servant didn't do anything with the talent he was given. It's not so much that he was lazy. It's because he was afraid that he would lose it. Vis-a-vis, he was afraid to make a bad investment. And he felt like that was a worse outcome than simply giving his master back the one talent. And yet, he was wrong. He was very wrong. The worst outcome was the path he chose. That is, the path of complacency, i.e., the path where he didn't do anything, the path where he didn't even try. Now, not only did he not try, but he was very inconsiderate, for he disregarded the fact that he had options. This is why his master scolded him, saying, "You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed. Then you should have put my silver with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest." This line speaks to the downfall of the complacent servant, and you should have recognized it, for it is identical to the downfall of King Saul. Vis-a-vis, he doubted himself and his ability to yield an increase with the talent he was given. And like Saul, his self-doubt caused him to despair, which caused him to fear, which caused him to become irrational, which caused him to act contrary to the will of his master, which caused him to lose his life. And thus, we conclude the path of complacency does indeed yield the worst possible outcome. No room for complacency. Now, thus far, we have seen fear being used repeatedly by the degrees of doubt and disobedience. And we have seen how it has perpetuated lawlessness within the minds of many who have come before us. Therefore, I call upon you to give the more earnest heed to ensuring that fear is never in play when it comes to your thought processes. If it is, you will surely fall into a state of complacency. This speaks to a key matter related to the definition of complacency, which I shared with you in a prior podcast. And I will share it with you at this time in the form of an inflection point. Complacency isn't merely some smug satisfaction with your current estate that compels you to rest on your laurels. Quite the contrary, complacency exists and only exists where there is potential danger and or defect. And as long as we are on this quest, warring against the 80 degrees of lawlessness, there will always be danger and or defect. Thus, we conclude complacency is a spiritual death trait and one of the worst of its kind. Listen to me. If you truly want to succeed this quest and obtain the seal of Elohim, you must always be proactive. Remember, we are professional soldiers and we are being attacked by our enemies every day. And so we have to fight or we are going to die. Knowing this, do you honestly think there is any room or time for complacency? Do you suppose complacency has any place in your battle strategy if you are indeed a true contender for the seal of Elohim and committed to fighting a good fight? My dear friends, take my advice and be like Daniel. Take my advice and purpose in your heart and every facet of your being to fight a good fight, to stay ahead of the spiritual curve, to always do what you know is right. For this is the will of Elohim concerning you. They lost their senses. Now, as you would expect, complacency as a critical degree of disobedience represents the most prominent stronghold the enemy will establish within your mind. To wit, complacency compromises the full breadth of your thought dimension. You can see this by observing the diagram below. To wit, every aspect of your thought dimension has been corrupted by complacency. Look here, every degree of lawlessness that is plaguing your thought dimension at this interval is designed to achieve one central goal. And that goal is simple: maintain the stronghold of complacency, such that doubt and disobedience should reign in your mind forever. To wit, all the strongholds of doubt and disobedience are designed to ultimately support one, and that is the stronghold of complacency. In doing so, they are ensuring that you are, to some degree, inflicted by all the degrees of lawlessness. This is the power of complacency. Not only this, but if you recall, there were two rays of hope within your thought dimension in the case that you should lose your war with doubt. Enter your conscience and your senses. Look here, complacency being fueled by the full force of doubt and disobedience closes the door on both these two prospects. Now, the question of the hour then is, what happened to these two rays of hope? I will tell you, beginning with your senses. With all the faculties of your thought dimension under their control, the first thing doubt and disobedience will do is neutralize the sensory regions of your left and right brains, rendering them inactive. As a result, stimuli will begin passing directly into your thought processes, which have all been compromised by distrust, as you can see by the diagram below. This counter operation will allow yourself to dictate your interpretation of stimuli from the start, making it quite impossible for you to establish a baseline of truth and facts. Listen to me. This is one of the most devastating events that could ever happen in your life. For look, whereas the original damage of doubt caused your thought processes to simply twist the truth and manufacture its own set of facts, there is now no truth to twist. And thus, the manufacturing of bad facts stemming from bad data will become a natural process that feels genuine and authentic. 2 Timothy 2:24-26 is revealing, and a servant of the master should not quarrel, but be gentle towards all, able to teach, patient when wronged, in meekness instructing those who are in opposition, lest somehow Elohim gives them repentance unto a thorough knowledge of the truth, and they come to their senses out of the snare of the devil, having been taken captain by him to do his desire. Now, this passage confirms the precedence of believers losing their senses and thus needing to come to their senses. Likewise, it establishes the fact that they lost their senses because they fell quarry to the snare of the devil, having been taken captive to do his desire and not the desire of Elohim. And this, my friends, is the primary objective of complacency. And then there was none. Now, this brings us to the second and final piece of your thought dimension that was not compromised by doubt. And yet, it will not be able to survive the onslaught of complacency. Enter your conscience. Perhaps the most depressing tragedy of the chronicles of your mind. Your conscience is the last man standing as it pertains to your war with disobedience. And regrettably, your conscience not only suffers a worse fate than your senses, my dear friends, your conscience suffers the worst fate of all the actors and faculties within your mind. For he or she is the most active fighter in your war with disobedience and doubt. Even when every other actor and faculty is compromised, and doubt and disobedience are on the verge of a complete takeover, your conscience continues to fight. He is a gift from Elohim, and he understands the concept of faithful until death. And thus, he fights to the death, for this is the mind of the devil and pure evil. To wit, the enemy only has one goal as it pertains to your conscience. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. Whereas the enemy neutralizes your senses and the other actors and faculties within your thought dimension, he annihilates your conscience, i.e., he kills it. 1 Timothy 4:1-2 is revealing. Now the Spirit speaks expressly that in latter times some shall fall away from the faith, paying attention to misleading spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron. Now, this act of searing has two damaging implications. First, it confirms your conscience can be killed. To wit, once your conscience has been seared with a hot iron, it is rendered senseless. And apart from spiritual senses, there is no spiritual life. The second implication is even worse than the first, vis-a-vis the enemy institutes a new conscience, a wicked conscience that has the opposite function of the conscience Elohim gave us. Consider this. Whereas our good conscience is designed to distinguish between right and wrong in order to follow after what is right and to resist what is wrong, the wicked conscience instituted by complacency is designed to promote the desires of yourself. Ergo, the wicked conscience equates what is right to the desires of yourself and ultimately your ego. And this is why our world has been constantly plagued by men and women who are only committed to doing what is right in their own eyes. Titus 1:15-16 is revealing. Indeed, all matters are clean to the clean, but to those who are defiled and unbelieving, no matter is clean, but both their mind and conscience are defiled. They profess to know Elohim, but in works they deny him, being abominable and disobedient and unfit for any good work. Now, this passage clearly ties a defiled mind and conscience with doubt and disobedience. Not only this, but the scriptures also make the inverse correlation, i.e., the word of truth confirms the antidote to a wicked conscience is a combination of obedience and faith. Hebrews 10:22-23 is revealing, let us draw near with a true heart and completeness of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from a wicked conscience and our bodies washed with clean water. Let us hold fast the confession of our faith without yielding, for he who promised is trustworthy. Now, in line with this passage, we will thoroughly analyze how faith and obedience work together to not only free us from a wicked conscience, but how they also defeat the work of disobedience in our minds. And we will do so in the upcoming podcast. Until then, here is what you need to know about the impact of complacency. To wit, here is the conclusion of these matters, revealing the devastating impact of disobedience in your mind. When doubt completed its counterwork, there were only two rays of hope remaining within your thought dimension. And these continued for a time, for they survived the onslaughts of noncompliance and nonconformance. And then complacency set in completely. And after he neutralized your senses, he killed your conscience. And thus, whereas you began your war with disobedience with two potential paths of recovery, you lost the war. And these two paths disappeared. And then there was none. This is the impact of complacency and the great damage of disobedience. The war is lost. The damage is done. Now, here is the final word. There is no good that I could find when Satan reigns within the mind. Brothers and sisters, I have shown you, line upon line, precept upon precept, how the 3 degrees of disobedience systematically cripple your mind to the point where the door is open for the enemy to take full control. It's why these most recent podcasts have been longer than usual. It's because these are critical matters. And the truth is, I could have said more. I could have said a lot more. And yet, those of you who truly love Yahuwah and are true contenders for the seal of Elohim heard everything you needed to hear. You know everything you need to know about the grave danger and the damage of disobedience. And so from now, we can start shifting the conversation to the amazing prospects of obedience. Trust me, concerning this matter, I have a lot to say. For although the foundation of spiritual power is indeed faith, you will never realize this power if you fail to obey. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on all the lessons you have heard this week and ask the Father to give you clarity on anything you are struggling to receive. And if you are led, please feel free to reach out to me. You can fill out a form on our website and let us know what questions you have. And remember, the only question that can truly hurt you is the one you fail to ask. Last but not least, enjoy the upcoming Shabbat and the weekend, and be ready to get back at it next week as we continue to make our calling and election sure in pursuit of the precious and priceless seal of Elohim. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 368, How Disobedience Plagues the Mind, Part 5. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 370, The Power of Spiritual Strategy. I will post this podcast on Monday, November 11th, 2024. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.